The sound of that slap silenced the entire emergency room. Everyone whispered that I was finished, that the wealthy donor who hit me would have my badge by morning. But they were wrong. Because when I walked into the chief of staff's office the next day, expecting to be fired, I didn't find my termination letter. I found the woman who slapped me, surrounded by police officers. And the man standing next to her? He was the reason she was about to lose everything. You won't believe who he was or the secret he was holding. Before I reveal the twist that destroyed her arrogance, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you believe justice should always be served. Trust me, you will want to see how this ends. My name is Emma Reynolds. I have been an ER nurse in Brooklyn for 15 years. I thought I had seen it all. Gunshots, crashes, chaos. In this job, you learn to leave your feelings at the door and just work. But that night broke every rule. A code red came in over the radio. Jason Miller, 18 years old, massive trauma from a car crash. He was bleeding out. We were losing him. My team and I went to work immediately. I was fighting to find a vein, fighting to keep his heart beating. The room was controlled chaos. Suddenly, the trauma doors flew open. Linda Miller, Jason's mother, stormed in, dripping in diamonds and expensive perfume. She didn't care about the sterile field. She screamed, "Get your hands off my son!" I didn't even look up. I shouted, "Ma'am, you need to leave. We are saving his life." But she didn't listen. She grabbed my arm. She actually grabbed me while I was trying to intubate her dying son. She yelled, "Do you know who I am? I own this hospital. Get away from him." At that exact moment, the monitor flatlined. A long, high-pitched beep filled the room. Jason's heart had stopped. I grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Clear!" I shouted, but Linda lunged at me. She tried to pull the paddles from my hands, screaming that I was hurting him. If I didn't shock him in 3 seconds, he would be dead. I had no choice. I shoved her back with my hip, hard. "Get back!" I yelled. I delivered the shock. His body convulsed. I watched the monitor. And there it was. A rhythm. His heart was beating again. I let out a breath of relief and turned around to tell her that her son was alive. Crack. Her hand struck my face with enough force to snap my head back. My cheek burned like fire. The entire ER went dead silent. Doctors, nurses, even other patients. Everyone froze. She pointed a manicured finger at my face and hissed, "You are finished. I will have your license. You touched me. You pushed me. By tomorrow morning, you won't even be able to get a job cleaning the floors of this hospital." I didn't say a word. I swallowed the rage, turned my back on her, and continued to check Jason's vitals. Because I am a professional. I couldn't sleep at all that night. My face was swollen, but my pride hurt more. At 7:20 a.m., my phone rang. It was the chief's secretary. Her voice was shaking. "Emma, come to the office immediately. The board is here, and Mrs. Miller is here." I felt sick. This was it. I drove to the hospital like a dead woman walking. As I walked down the hallway, the security guards looked at me with pity. I knocked on the chief's heavy oak door and entered. The room was freezing. The chief of staff looked pale, staring at his desk. Linda Miller was sitting in the leather chair like a queen, sipping water, smiling at my destruction. But then, I saw him. Standing by the window with his back turned to us was a tall man in a dark suit. Linda laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Say goodbye, nurse." The man by the window didn't turn around immediately. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the Brooklyn skyline like he was deciding someone's entire future with a single thought. The silence in that office was suffocating. Linda Miller's smile grew wider with every passing second. She thought she had already won. She thought I was about to be dragged out in disgrace, my career destroyed, my reputation shattered. She leaned back in that leather chair like she owned not just the hospital, but the entire world. The chief of staff finally cleared his throat. His voice was weak, almost apologetic. "Emma, Mrs. Miller has filed a formal complaint against you. She claims you assaulted her during a medical emergency. She's demanding your immediate termination and the suspension of your nursing license. The board has been pressured to take this matter very seriously. I stood there, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself. But I knew how this worked. Rich donors like Linda Miller didn't just complain. They made phone calls. They pulled strings. They destroyed lives before breakfast. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say a single word, the man by the window finally turned around, and I froze. I recognized him instantly. Everyone in Brooklyn recognized him. Detective Marcus Hayes. He was a legend in the NYPD, the man who had solved some of the most brutal cases in the city's history. The detective who never bent the rules for anyone, no matter how rich or powerful they were. He had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to justice. And now he was standing in this office, staring directly at Linda Miller with eyes that could cut through steel. Linda's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She didn't understand yet. She still thought she was untouchable. Detective Hayes spoke, and his voice was calm, measured, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Mrs. Miller, before we proceed with any disciplinary action against Nurse Reynolds, I think we need to discuss something far more important. He paused, letting the tension build. Your son, Jason, is alive today because of the actions taken by this woman. But you already knew that, didn't you? Linda's face twitched. What are you talking about? My son is alive because I got him here in time. This nurse nearly killed him with her incompetence. Detective Hayes didn't blink. He pulled a small tablet from his jacket pocket and tapped the screen. Actually, Mrs. Miller, your son is alive despite you. He turned the tablet around so everyone in the room could see it. Security footage from the ER, time-stamped, crystal clear. It showed everything. Linda storming into the trauma bay. Linda grabbing my arm while I was trying to save Jason. Linda trying to rip the defibrillator paddles from my hands as the monitor flatlined. And then it showed me pushing her back, just enough to deliver the shock that restarted Jason's heart. The chief of staff leaned forward, his eyes widening as he watched the footage. Linda's face went pale. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Detective Hayes continued, his tone colder now. You interfered with a medical emergency, Mrs. Miller. You physically obstructed a healthcare professional while she was performing life-saving treatment. That's a crime. In fact, it's considered assault on a medical worker in the state of New York. He let that sink in for a moment before adding, and then you struck Nurse Reynolds across the face in front of dozens of witnesses. That's battery, also a crime. Linda shot to her feet, her voice rising in panic. This is ridiculous. I was emotional. My son was dying. Any mother would have done the same thing. Detective Hayes shook his head slowly. Any mother would have trusted the professionals to do their job. Any mother would have stepped back and let the trained medical team save her child. But you didn't do that, Mrs. Miller. You made it harder. You endangered your son's life. And then, when Nurse Reynolds succeeded in saving him, you assaulted her. Linda's hands were shaking now. She pointed at me, her voice shrill and desperate. She pushed me. She put her hands on me. That's assault. Detective Hayes tilted his head slightly, almost amused. She used the minimum necessary force to prevent you from killing your own son. That's not assault, Mrs. Miller. That's doing her job. He tapped the tablet again. I've already sent this footage to the district attorney's office. They're reviewing it as we speak. The room went completely silent. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. She looked at the chief of staff, expecting him to defend her, to side with the wealthy donor who had poured money into the hospital for years. But the chief just stared down at his desk, his face gray and drawn. He wasn't going to save her. He couldn't. Detective Hayes stepped closer to Linda, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Miller. You're going to withdraw your complaint against Nurse Reynolds immediately. You're going to issue a formal apology to her in writing, and you're going to make a public statement acknowledging that she saved your son's life. If you refuse, I will personally ensure that you are charged with obstruction of medical care, assault, and battery. And given your behavior on that footage, I don't think any jury in Brooklyn is going to side with you." Linda's legs seemed to give out. She sank back into the chair, her face crumbling. But I'm a donor. I've given millions to this hospital. They can't just—" The chief of staff finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Miller, donations don't buy immunity from the law. If Detective Hayes files charges, the hospital will have no choice but to cooperate with the investigation. And frankly, after watching that footage, I'm not sure we can continue to accept your financial support. It would be a conflict of interest." Linda stared at him in disbelief, her perfect facade shattering. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with something between hatred and desperation. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You planned this. You wanted to destroy me." I finally spoke, my voice steady and clear. "I didn't plan anything, Mrs. Miller. I just did my job. I saved your son's life. And if you had let me do that without interference, none of this would have happened." Detective Hayes nodded. "She's right. This is entirely on you." He glanced at the chief of staff. "I'll need a copy of the hospital's incident report, and I'll be interviewing the other staff members who were present in the ER that night." The chief nodded quickly. "Of course, Detective. Whatever you need." Linda stood up, trembling with rage and humiliation. She looked at me one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "You haven't won. This isn't over." But Detective Hayes stepped between us, his presence like a wall. "Yes, it is." He gestured toward the door. "You're free to leave, Mrs. Miller, but I suggest you contact a lawyer. You're going to need one." Linda stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The moment she was gone, I felt my knees buckle. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. The chief of staff stood up and extended his hand toward me. "Nurse Reynolds, on behalf of the hospital, I want to apologize for what you've been through. You acted with courage and professionalism under impossible circumstances. Your job is secure, and I will personally ensure that this incident is documented in your file as a commendation, not a complaint." I shook his hand, too stunned to speak. Detective Hayes approached me, his expression softening slightly. "You did good, Nurse Reynolds. Not everyone would have kept their cool like that." I looked up at him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you come here? How did you even know about this?" He smiled just a little. "Someone called me. Someone who saw what happened in the ER and knew you were about to get railroaded. He didn't say who, and I didn't ask. But I had a feeling I knew exactly who had made that call." As I left the chief's office, I felt like I was walking on air. My career wasn't over. I wasn't being fired. Linda Miller, the woman who thought she could destroy me with a single phone call, was the one facing consequences. Justice had been served. But as I walked back toward the ER, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Detective Hayes didn't just show up for any random nurse. Someone with serious influence had reached out to him, someone who wanted to make sure I was protected. And I was about to find out who that someone was. I pushed through the double doors of the ER, still shaking from everything that had just happened in the chief's office. My co-workers were huddled around the nurses' station, whispering like they always did after major drama. The moment they saw me, the whispers stopped. They stared at me like I was a ghost, like they couldn't believe I was still standing, still employed, still here. I didn't have the energy to explain. I just walked past them, heading straight for the break room. I needed coffee, silence, and 5 minutes to process the fact that my life hadn't just imploded. But before I could reach the break room door, someone grabbed my arm. I spun around, ready to snap at whoever it was, and found myself face to face with Dr. Adrian Cross. He was one of the senior attending physicians in the ER, a man who rarely spoke to nurses unless he was barking orders during a trauma. He was brilliant, cold, and intimidating, and right now he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Relief? Concern? Something else entirely? "Emma," he said quietly, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "We need to talk. Now." I frowned, pulling my arm back. "Dr. Cross, I just got out of the chief's office. I really need a minute to—" He cut me off, his tone urgent. "I know what happened in there. I know about Detective Hayes, and I know why he showed up." He glanced around the ER, making sure no one was listening. "Come with me. Please." There was something in his voice that made me hesitate. This wasn't the arrogant, dismissive doctor I was used to working with. This was someone who looked genuinely worried. I nodded slowly and followed him down the hallway, away from the noise and chaos of the ER. He led me to a small, empty consultation room and closed the door behind us. The moment we were alone, he turned to face me, his jaw tight. "I'm the one who called Detective Hayes," he said. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up. "You? Why?" "Because I saw what Linda Miller did to you, and I knew exactly what she was going to do next." He ran a hand through his dark hair, his frustration evident. "People like her don't just file complaints, Emma. They destroy careers. They make phone calls to board members, threaten to pull funding, and turn hospitals upside down until they get what they want. I've seen it happen before. I wasn't going to let it happen to you." I blinked, still trying to process this. "But why? You barely even know me. We've worked together for years, but you've never—" He looked away, his expression conflicted. "I know. I've kept my distance. I had to." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Linda Miller isn't just some wealthy donor, Emma. She's connected to people who could ruin both of us if they wanted to, and the reason I know that is because I used to be one of them." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Cross sat down on the edge of the desk, rubbing his temples like he was fighting off a headache. "Before I became a doctor, I grew up in that world. My family has money, a lot of it. I went to the best schools, knew all the right people, attended all the right parties, and I hated every second of it." He looked up at me, his eyes dark with regret. "I knew Linda Miller back then. She was part of the same social circle. And I knew her husband, Richard Miller, even better. Richard Miller. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Who is he?" Dr. Cross's expression hardened. He's a real estate developer, extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, and extremely dangerous. He's the kind of man who doesn't just buy buildings, he buys people. Politicians, judges, cops, anyone who can be useful to him. And Linda, she's his enforcer. She handles the social side of things, makes sure their image stays pristine, and destroys anyone who threatens their reputation. I felt a chill run down my spine. "So when I pushed her in the ER, you became a threat," Dr. Cross said bluntly. "You embarrassed her in front of dozens of people. You made her look weak. And in her world, that's unforgivable. She wasn't just going to get you fired, Emma. She was going to make sure you never worked in healthcare again. She would have spread rumors, made calls to other hospitals, blacklisted you across the entire city." My hands clenched into fists. "So why did Detective Hayes believe you? Why did he take your word over hers?" "Because Marcus Hayes is one of the few people in this city who can't be bought," Dr. Cross said. "I've known him for years. We worked together on a case a long time ago, back when I was still in med school. He helped me when I needed it most, and I've stayed in touch with him ever since. When I saw what Linda was about to do to you, I called him and told him everything. I sent him the security footage before Linda could have it deleted." I stared at him, my mind reeling. She was going to delete the footage? Of course she was, Dr. Cross said grimly. That's how people like her operate. They erase evidence, rewrite the narrative, and make themselves the victim. If I hadn't acted fast, that footage would have disappeared, and it would have been your word against hers. And in a battle like that, She always wins. I sank down into one of the chairs, my legs suddenly weak. I had no idea. I thought I was done. I thought she was going to destroy me. She tried, Dr. Cross said, but she underestimated you, and she underestimated me. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I'm telling you all of this because you need to understand what you're up against, Emma. Linda Miller isn't going to just walk away from this. She's humiliated. She's facing criminal charges. And she's married to a man who will do anything to protect his family's reputation. My stomach twisted. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to be careful, Dr. Cross said. Richard Miller is not someone you want as an enemy. He has resources, connections, and a very long memory. If he decides you're a problem, he'll come after you, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I forced it down. I didn't do anything wrong. I saved her son's life. I know that, Dr. Cross said, and Detective Hayes knows that. But people like Richard Miller don't care about the truth. They care about control. He stood up, his expression serious. I'm going to do everything I can to protect you, Emma. But you need to stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't talk to anyone from the Miller family. And if anything unusual happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. It had his personal cell phone number written on the back. I took it, my hand trembling slightly. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself at risk for me? He hesitated, and for the first time since I'd known him, Dr. Adrian Cross looked vulnerable. Because I know what it's like to be targeted by people like them. And because... He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Because you didn't deserve what she did to you. You were just doing your job, and I couldn't stand by and let her destroy you for it. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name, but it made my heart beat a little faster. Before I could respond, his pager went off. He glanced down at it and sighed. I have to go. Trauma incoming. He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. Be careful, Emma, promise me. I nodded. I promise. He left, and I sat there alone in the consultation room, staring down at the business card in my hand. My life had just turned into something out of a thriller movie. A wealthy, powerful family wanted revenge. A detective was investigating them, and a doctor I barely knew had just put his own career on the line to protect me. I should have been terrified, and part of me was, but another part of me, the part that had fought to save Jason Miller's life, the part that had stood my ground when Linda Miller slapped me, that part was ready to fight back. Because if the Millers thought they could intimidate me into silence, they were dead wrong. I wasn't going anywhere, and I wasn't going to let them win. But as I walked back out into the ER, I had no idea just how far Richard Miller was willing to go to protect his family's reputation, and I had no idea that the real nightmare was only just beginning. 3 days passed, and I tried to convince myself that everything was going back to normal. I showed up for my shifts, treated patients, avoided the whispers that still followed me through the hallways. Dr. Cross kept his distance during work hours, but I noticed him watching me sometimes, his eyes scanning the ER like he was expecting trouble to walk through the doors at any moment. Detective Hayes called me once to update me on the case against Linda Miller. The district attorney was moving forward with charges, and Linda had lawyered up with one of the most expensive defense attorneys in New York. But Hayes assured me that the evidence was solid and that I had nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But every time I walked to my car after a shift, I felt eyes on me. Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, my heart jumped. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that Richard Miller was too smart to do anything stupid, that he wouldn't risk his reputation by coming after a nurse. But deep down, I knew better. Men like Richard Miller didn't get to where they were by playing fair. They got there by crushing anyone who stood in their way. It was a Thursday night just after midnight when everything changed. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift, and I was exhausted. The ER had been slammed all night with stabbings, overdoses, and a multi-car pileup on the expressway. All I wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. I grabbed my jacket from my locker, said goodnight to the night shift crew, and headed out into the cold Brooklyn night. The hospital parking garage was dimly lit and mostly empty at this hour. My car was parked on the third level near the back. As I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing off the concrete, I heard another set of footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder but didn't see anyone. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was just another hospital employee heading to their car. But the footsteps quickened too. My pulse started to race. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I was maybe 20 feet from my car when I heard a voice behind me. Emma Reynolds? I spun around, my heart pounding. A man stood about 10 feet away, half hidden in the shadows between two parked cars. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He didn't look like a mugger or a random attacker. He looked like someone who got paid very well to do very bad things. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is that you need to stop what you're doing." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, taking a step back toward my car. He took a step forward, closing the distance. "Yes, you do. The charges against Mrs. Miller. You need to drop them. Tell the district attorney that you don't want to press charges. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." My fear was quickly being replaced by anger. She assaulted me. She interfered with a medical emergency. I'm not dropping anything. The man's smile faded. "That's unfortunate." He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going for a gun. But instead, he pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Miller is a reasonable man. He's willing to compensate you for your trouble. There's $50,000 in this envelope, cash. All you have to do is walk away." I stared at the envelope, then back at his face. "You're trying to bribe me?" "I'm trying to help you," he said smoothly. $50,000 is a lot of money for a nurse. You could pay off your student loans, take a vacation, start over somewhere new. All you have to do is make this problem go away. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made my hands shake. "Get away from me." His expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Miss Reynolds. Mr. Miller is offering you a way out. If you refuse, things are going to get very difficult for you. Is that a threat?" I shot back. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes cold. "It's a promise. Mr. Miller has friends in very high places, friends who can make your life hell. You could lose your job, your nursing license, your apartment, your entire future." He stepped closer, and I could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more menacing. "Or you could take the money and walk away. The choice is yours." For a moment, I was frozen, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to grab that envelope and run, to take the money and disappear, to avoid whatever nightmare Richard Miller had planned for me. But then I thought about Jason Miller, lying on that gurney, his heart stopped, his life hanging by a thread. I thought about Linda Miller, trying to rip the defibrillator paddles from my hands, endangering her own son because of her arrogance. And I thought about every patient I had ever fought to save, every life I had held in my hands. I looked the man straight in the eye and said, "Tell Richard Miller to go to hell." His jaw tightened. "You're going to regret this." "I'm already regretting that I didn't call the cops the second I saw you," I snapped. "Now get out of my way." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding whether or not to escalate things right here, right now. But then, from somewhere nearby, I heard voices. Other hospital employees heading toward the parking garage. The man glanced in their direction, then back at me. He slipped the envelope back into his jacket. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows before I could even think about getting his license plate or calling for help. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I fumbled for my phone and called the one person I knew would believe me. Dr. Cross answered on the second ring. "Emma, what's wrong?" "I just got threatened in the parking garage," I said, my voice trembling. "Some guy, he tried to bribe me to drop the charges against Linda Miller. When I refused, he threatened me." There was a pause, and then Dr. Cross's voice turned ice cold. "Where are you right now?" "Still in the garage. 3rd level. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming to you." He hung up and I stood there, clutching my phone, watching the shadows for any sign of the man coming back. Less than 3 minutes later, Dr. Cross came sprinting out of the stairwell, still in his scrubs, his face pale with worry. He ran straight to me and grabbed my shoulders, his eyes scanning me for injuries. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" I shook my head. "No. He tried to pay me off. $50,000. And when I said no, he threatened me." Dr. Cross's jaw clenched. "Did you see his face? Would you recognize him?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'd recognize him." "Good." He pulled out his phone and called Detective Hayes, putting it on speaker. "Marcus, it's Adrian. Richard Miller just sent someone to threaten Emma Reynolds in the hospital parking garage. They tried to bribe her, and when she refused, they made threats." Detective Hayes' voice came through, sharp and furious. "Is she hurt?" "No, but she's shaken. And Marcus, this was a professional, not some random thug. This was someone Miller sent." "I'm on my way," Hayes said. "Don't let her leave until I get there. And Adrian, stay with her. If Miller is escalating this fast, he's desperate. That makes him dangerous." The line went dead. Dr. Cross put his phone away and looked at me, his expression grim. "Come on. We're going back inside. You're not staying out here." He walked me back into the hospital, keeping himself between me and the shadows, like he was ready to physically fight off anyone who came near me. We went to the doctor's lounge, a secure room that required a key card to enter. He locked the door behind us and made me sit down. "I'm calling hospital security," he said, "and I'm filing a report. This is assault and attempted bribery. Miller just made a huge mistake." I sat there, numb, as Dr. Cross made phone calls and filed reports. Within 20 minutes, Detective Hayes arrived, along with 2 uniformed police officers. Hayes took my statement, recorded every detail I could remember about the man who had threatened me, and assured me that he was going to bring Richard Miller down. But as I sat there, surrounded by cops and doctors and security guards, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Richard Miller wasn't going to stop. He had too much to lose. His wife was facing criminal charges. His family's reputation was on the line. And he had just shown me exactly how far he was willing to go to make this problem disappear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And the next move Miller made, I knew, would be even worse. Detective Hayes didn't waste any time. Within hours of my statement, he had officers reviewing security footage from the hospital parking garage, running facial recognition on the man who had threatened me, and digging into Richard Miller's known associates. By the next morning, Hayes called me with an update that made my stomach drop. The man from the parking garage was identified as Vincent Russo, a former private investigator with a history of working for wealthy clients who needed problems to disappear quietly. He had no official criminal record, which meant he was very good at what he did, but Hayes had enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. The problem was that Russo had already vanished. His apartment was empty, his phone was disconnected, and every trail led to a dead end. Richard Miller had clearly warned him to disappear the moment I refused the bribe. But Hayes wasn't discouraged. In fact, he sounded almost excited. "Emma, Miller just made his first real mistake. Sending Russo after you was reckless. It shows he's panicking. And when powerful people panic, they make mistakes. We're going to use that." I wanted to feel reassured, but all I felt was exhausted and afraid. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours since the parking garage incident. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Russo's cold stare and heard his calm, menacing voice promising that things would get very difficult for me. Dr. Cross had insisted I stay at his place for a few nights, claiming it was safer than my own apartment, and I hadn't argued. His place was a sleek, modern loft in a secure building with a doorman and cameras everywhere. He gave me his bedroom and took the couch, refusing to let me protest. On the third night, I finally worked up the courage to ask him the question that had been gnawing at me since the parking garage. We were sitting in his living room, both too wired to sleep, drinking coffee at 2 a.m. "Why are you really doing this, Adrian? I mean, I get that you knew Linda Miller from your past, and you wanted to help me because it was the right thing to do. But this is more than that. You're putting your entire life on hold to protect me. You're risking your career, your safety, everything. Why?" He stared down into his coffee mug, his jaw tight. For a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he looked up at me, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his eyes that I had never seen before. Because I know what it's like to be destroyed by people like Richard Miller, and I know what it's like to have no one stand up for you when it happens. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. He set his coffee down and leaned back against the couch, his expression distant. "When I was in medical school, I was engaged to a woman named Claire. She was brilliant, kind, and ambitious. She wanted to be a journalist, the kind who exposed corruption and held powerful people accountable." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "She was working on an investigative piece about a real estate development deal that involved bribes, illegal zoning changes, and connections to organized crime. And the man at the center of it all was Richard Miller." My breath caught. Oh my God. Dr. Cross nodded grimly. Claire had sources, documents, recordings. She was close to breaking the story wide open. But Miller found out. He sent people after her. At first, it was just intimidation, threatening phone calls, someone following her, that kind of thing. But Claire refused to back down. She thought the truth would protect her. He closed his eyes, and I could see the pain etched into his face. One night, she was driving home from meeting a source. Her car went off a bridge. The police ruled it an accident, brake failure. But I knew. I knew it wasn't an accident. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "Adrian, I'm so sorry." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a cold, burning rage. I tried to get justice for her. I went to the police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. But Miller had covered his tracks too well. There was no evidence, no witnesses, nothing. And everyone told me to let it go, to move on, to stop making accusations I couldn't prove. So I did. I buried myself in my work, became a doctor, and tried to forget. He looked at me, his voice fierce. But I never forgot what he took from me. And when I saw Linda Miller about to do the same thing to you that her husband did to Claire, I couldn't just stand by and let it happen. Not again. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Thank you for everything." He squeezed back, his expression softening just a little. "We're going to stop them, Emma. This time, we're going to make sure they face consequences." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. Richard Miller had gotten away with destroying Claire's life. What made us think we could stop him now? The answer came 2 days later, in the most unexpected way possible. I was back at work trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy when Detective Hayes called me and told me to meet him at the precinct immediately. He wouldn't say why over the phone, but his tone told me it was urgent. Dr. Cross drove me there, and we found Hayes waiting for us in an interrogation room. Sitting across from him, looking pale and terrified, was someone I never expected to see cooperating with the police. It was Jason Miller, Linda and Richard's son, the young man whose life I had saved. Jason looked up when I walked in, and his eyes filled with tears. "Nurse Reynolds, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what my mother did to you, and I'm sorry for what my father is trying to do." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know until a few days ago. But when I found out, I couldn't stay silent." Detective Hayes gestured for us to sit down. "Jason came to me yesterday. He has information about his father's criminal activities, information that could bring down Richard Miller for good. Jason took a shaky breath. My father has been paying off city officials for years. Bribes, kickbacks, illegal contracts. He has records of everything. He keeps them in a safe in his office in case he ever needs leverage over anyone. And after what happened with my mom, after he found out about the charges, he started planning to use those records to threaten people. He looked at me, his voice breaking. Including you, Nurse Reynolds. He was going to fabricate evidence, plant drugs in your apartment, destroy your life. And I couldn't let that happen, not after you saved me. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He was going to frame me? Jason nodded miserably. He's done it before. To journalists, to prosecutors, to anyone who got in his way. But I have access to his office. I can get you those records. I can get you everything you need to take him down. Detective Hayes leaned forward. Jason is willing to wear a wire and record his father discussing the bribery and the plans to frame you. With that evidence, combined with what we already have, we can arrest Richard Miller and dismantle his entire operation. Dr. Cross looked at Jason, his expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? That's your father. Jason's voice was quiet but firm. Because he's a monster. And because Nurse Reynolds risked her career to save my life, even after my mother treated her like garbage. I owe her everything. And I'm not going to let my father destroy her the way he's destroyed so many other people. I didn't know what to say. This kid, barely 18 years old, was about to betray his own father to protect me. It was brave and terrifying and heartbreaking all at once. Detective Hayes stood up. We're moving forward with this tonight. Jason, you'll go home, act normal, and tomorrow morning you'll go into your father's office and get him talking. We'll have officers stationed nearby in case anything goes wrong. Jason nodded, his jaw set with determination. I can do this. As we left the precinct, Dr. Cross put a hand on my shoulder. This is it, Emma. This is how we stop him. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard Miller was too smart, too careful, too dangerous to go down without a fight. And I was right. Because the next morning, when Jason went into his father's office wearing a wire, everything went horribly, catastrophically wrong. The morning Jason was supposed to confront his father, I couldn't eat, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except pace back and forth in Dr. Cross's loft while we waited for news from Detective Hayes. Hayes had promised to keep us updated every step of the way, and he had assured us that they had a team in place, ready to move in the second anything went wrong. But as the minutes ticked by and my phone stayed silent, the knot of dread in my stomach grew tighter and tighter. Dr. Cross sat on the couch, his face pale, his leg bouncing nervously. He kept checking his phone, then looking up at me, then checking his phone again. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. All we could do was wait and hope that Jason was safe, that the plan was working, that Richard Miller would finally face justice. At exactly 9:43 in the morning, my phone rang. I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer. Detective Hayes' voice came through, and it was tight with tension. Emma, we have a situation. Jason went into his father's office as planned, but Richard Miller knew. Somehow, he knew about the wire. My heart stopped. What? How? We don't know yet, Hayes said. But the second Jason walked into that office, Richard confronted him. He ripped the wire off Jason's chest and smashed it. Then he locked the door. We have officers surrounding the building, but Richard is refusing to come out. He's holding Jason inside, and he's demanding to speak with you. Me? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why me? Because he knows you're the reason his empire is crumbling, Hayes said grimly. He's not thinking rationally anymore, Emma. He's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not leave that apartment. Do not go anywhere near Richard Miller. But what about Jason? I demanded. Is he okay? Is he hurt? We don't know, Hayes admitted. Richard won't let anyone inside. He won't talk to negotiators. He'll only talk to you. Dr. Cross grabbed the phone from my hand and put it on speaker. "Marcus, you can't seriously be considering sending her in there. Richard Miller is unstable. If Emma goes in there, he could kill her." "I'm not sending her anywhere," Hayes said firmly, "but I need her to understand the situation. Richard Miller is holding his own son hostage, and he's willing to throw his entire life away just to get revenge on the people he thinks wronged him. We're dealing with a man who has nothing left to lose." "Then what do we do?" Dr. Cross asked, his voice strained. "We wait," Hayes said. "We keep the building surrounded, we keep trying to negotiate, and we hope he makes a mistake. But Emma, I need you to promise me that you will not try to be a hero. Do not go near that building. Stay with Adrian. Stay safe." I opened my mouth to agree, but before I could say anything, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I looked at Dr. Cross, my hands trembling. "It's him. It's Richard Miller." "Don't answer it," Dr. Cross said immediately. "Let Hayes trace the call." But my finger was already moving toward the answer button. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I needed to hear his voice, to understand what kind of man would hold his own son hostage. Maybe it was because I wanted to confront the monster who had tried to destroy my life. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I thought I could talk him down, convince him to let Jason go. I answered the call and put it on speaker. Richard Miller's voice came through, smooth and controlled, like he was conducting a business meeting instead of holding his son at gunpoint. "Nurse Reynolds, thank you for answering. I was beginning to think you didn't care what happened to my son." "Let him go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jason didn't do anything wrong. This is between you and me." Richard laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Oh, but Jason did do something wrong, Miss Reynolds. He betrayed me, his own father. He tried to hand over evidence that would have destroyed everything I've built, and all because you convinced him that you were some kind of hero." "I didn't convince him of anything," I shot back. "Jason made his own choice. He chose to do the right thing, something you've never done in your entire life." There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice was filled with venom. "You self-righteous little nobody. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? My wife is facing criminal charges. My business partners are distancing themselves from me. My reputation is in ruins, all because you couldn't mind your own business and let my wife handle a family matter." "Your wife assaulted me," I said, my anger rising. "She interfered with a medical emergency and endangered your son's life. I was doing my job. And now you're going to pay for it," Richard said coldly. "Here's what's going to happen, Miss Reynolds. You're going to come to my office, alone, unarmed, and you're going to publicly confess that you fabricated the charges against my wife, that you lied to the police, and that you're dropping all charges. You're going to destroy your own credibility and clear my wife's name." "And if I don't?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Then my son dies," Richard said simply, "and his blood will be on your hands." The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. Dr. Cross grabbed my shoulders, his face inches from mine. "Emma, you are not going in there. Do you hear me? You are not going. But if I don't, he'll kill Jason," I whispered. "He'll kill his own son just to get revenge on me." "He's bluffing," Dr. Cross said desperately. "He has to be. No father would actually kill his own child." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes, because we both knew that Richard Miller was capable of anything. Detective Hayes called back immediately, and I could hear the chaos in the background, shouting, sirens, the sound of a tactical team mobilizing. "Emma, do not go near that building. We're moving in. We're going to end this now." "But what if you can't get to Jason in time?" I asked. "What if Richard kills him before you can breach the door?" There was a long pause. Then Hayes said quietly, "That's a risk we have to take. Because if you go in there, Emma, he'll kill you both." I looked at Dr. Cross, my mind racing. Every instinct I had as a nurse, every part of me that had spent 15 years fighting to save lives, was screaming at me to do something. Jason Miller was 18 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he was only in this situation because he had tried to protect me. I couldn't just stand by and let him die. I made my decision. "I'm going," I said. Dr. Cross's eyes went wide. "Emma, no, absolutely not." I pulled away from him and grabbed my jacket. "I have to. Jason saved my life by coming forward. Now I have to save his." "You'll get yourself killed," Dr. Cross said, his voice breaking. "And then what? Richard Miller wins anyway." I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. "Then at least I'll die knowing I tried to do the right thing." Before he could stop me, I ran out the door and down the stairs, ignoring his shouts behind me. I knew Detective Hayes would try to intercept me. I knew Dr. Cross would call him and tell him where I was going. But I also knew that if I didn't get to Richard Miller's office before the tactical team breached the doors, Jason would be dead. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The entire ride, I kept thinking about Jason, about the fear in his eyes when he had confessed his father's crimes, about the courage it had taken for him to stand up to the most dangerous man in his life. And I thought about Dr. Cross, about the woman he had loved and lost because Richard Miller had destroyed her. This had to end. One way or another, this had to end today. When the cab pulled up in front of the office building, I saw police cars everywhere, officers crouched behind vehicles, snipers on rooftops. Detective Hayes spotted me immediately and came running over, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Emma, what the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay away." "I'm going in," I said, my voice firm. "Richard Miller asked for me. If I don't go in there, he'll kill Jason." "We're handling this," Hayes said. "You need to leave, now." But I was already walking toward the building entrance, my legs shaking but my resolve unshakable. Hayes grabbed my arm, but I turned to look at him, and whatever he saw in my eyes made him let go. "Please," I said quietly, "trust me." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back. "If you're going in there, you're wearing a vest, and you're taking a wire. Non-negotiable." I nodded. Within minutes, I was fitted with a bulletproof vest under my jacket and a tiny microphone taped to my chest. Hayes looked at me one last time, his expression grim. "The second things go wrong, we're coming in. Don't try to be a hero, Emma." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just a nurse, and I'm going to save that kid's life." I walked through the doors of Richard Miller's office building, alone, terrified and determined to end this nightmare once and for all. The building was eerily silent as I stepped through the glass doors and into the marble lobby. The usual bustle of employees and clients was gone, evacuated by the police hours ago. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I made my way toward the elevators, and every sound made my heart jump. I could feel the weight of the bulletproof vest under my jacket, heavy and restrictive, a constant reminder that I was walking into a situation where I might actually get shot. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists just to keep them steady. The elevator ride up to the 15th floor felt like it took hours, even though it was probably less than a minute. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped out into a long, dimly lit hallway. Richard Miller's office was at the end, the door slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the darkness. I took a deep breath and started walking. Every step felt like it might be my last. I could hear Detective Hayes' voice in my earpiece, quiet and tense. "We have eyes on you, Emma. Just stay calm. Keep him talking. The moment we have a clear shot or an opening, we're coming in." I reached the door and pushed it open slowly. The office was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive artwork on the walls, and a desk the size of a small car. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Richard Miller. He was tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, but his face was haggard, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. In his right hand, he held a gun pointed directly at his son. Jason was sitting in a chair near the desk, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face bruised and tear-streaked. When he saw me, his eyes went wide with horror. "Nurse Reynolds, no, you shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have—" "Shut up!" Richard snapped, his voice sharp and cold. He looked at me, and a twisted smile spread across his face. "Well, well, the hero nurse has arrived. I have to admit, Miss Reynolds, I'm impressed. Most people wouldn't have the guts to walk into a room with a man holding a gun. But then again, you've always been too stubborn for your own good, haven't you?" I stopped a few feet inside the door, my hands raised slightly to show I wasn't armed. "Let Jason go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "He's your son, Richard. He doesn't deserve this." Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. My son betrayed me. He tried to destroy everything I've built. And for what? For you? A nobody nurse who couldn't mind her own business? He was trying to do the right thing, I said. Something you've never understood. Richard's expression darkened. "Don't you dare lecture me about right and wrong. You have no idea what I've had to do to build this empire, the sacrifices I've made, the people I've had to crush. And now, because of you, it's all falling apart." "That's on you, not me," I said, taking a small step forward. "You're the one who bribed officials. You're the one who sent thugs to threaten me. You're the one holding your own son hostage. None of this is my fault, Richard. It's all yours." His hand tightened on the gun, and I saw his finger move closer to the trigger. Jason let out a choked sob. "Dad, please, don't do this. Just let her go. Let us both go. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," Richard said coldly. "It's over. My reputation is destroyed. My business is ruined. My wife is going to prison. And it's all because of her." He pointed the gun at me now, and I felt my blood turn to ice. "So here's what's going to happen, Miss Reynolds. You're going to get down on your knees and you're going to beg me for forgiveness. And then you're going to call Detective Hayes and tell him that you lied about everything. That my wife never assaulted you. That you fabricated the charges. That this whole thing was a setup to extort money from my family." "I'm not doing that," I said quietly, "because it's not true. And you know it's not true." "Then you're going to die," Richard said simply. "And so is my son. Because if I can't have my life back, then I'll make sure you both pay for taking it from me." I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, and in that split second, I made a decision. I lunged forward, shouting at the top of my lungs, "Jason, get down!" Everything happened in a blur. Richard swung the gun toward me and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and I felt a searing pain in my left shoulder as the bullet tore through flesh and muscle. I hit the ground hard, my vision swimming, but I forced myself to stay conscious. I heard Jason scream, heard the sound of shattering glass as the tactical team crashed through the windows, heard Detective Hayes shouting commands. Richard fired again, but this time the shot went wide. And then the room was filled with officers, guns drawn, shouting at Richard to drop his weapon. Richard stood there for a moment, the gun still in his hand, his face a mask of rage and despair. He looked at me, bleeding on the floor, and then at his son, sobbing and struggling against the zip ties. And then slowly he lowered the gun. "It's over," he whispered. "It's all over." The officers swarmed him, tackled him to the ground, and cuffed his hands behind his back. Detective Hayes rushed to my side, pressing his hands against my shoulder to stop the bleeding. "Medic!" he shouted. "I need a medic in here now." I looked past him and saw Dr. Cross burst through the door, his face white with terror. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands shaking as he examined the wound. "Emma, stay with me. You're going to be okay. Do you hear me? You're going to be okay." "Jason," I whispered, my voice weak. "Is Jason okay?" "He's fine," Hayes said. "You saved his life." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my shoulder bandaged and throbbing with pain. Dr. Cross was sitting in a chair beside me, his head in his hands. The moment he heard me stir, he looked up, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "You're awake," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank God you're awake." I tried to sit up, but the pain was too intense. I winced and fell back against the pillows. "What happened? Is Richard—" "He's in custody," Dr. Cross said. "He's facing charges for attempted murder, kidnapping, bribery, and about a dozen other crimes. He's never getting out of prison, Emma. It's over." "And Jason?" "He's okay. Shaken up, but okay. He's been asking about you. He wants to thank you for saving his life." I closed my eyes, exhausted but relieved. It was finally over. Richard Miller was behind bars, Jason was safe, and I was alive. Dr. Cross took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You scared the hell out of me," he said softly. "When I saw you go down, when I saw the blood, I thought I'd lost you." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm still here." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine. "Don't ever do that again. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered. Over the next few days, the story exploded across the news. Richard Miller's arrest was front-page headlines. The evidence Jason had helped gather, combined with the recordings from the hostage situation, was enough to bring down not just Richard, but several city officials and business partners who had been involved in his schemes. Linda Miller cut a deal with the district attorney, agreeing to testify against her husband in exchange for reduced charges. And Jason, brave, broken Jason, was placed in protective custody and given a fresh start far away from his toxic family. As for me, I became something of a local hero, though I hated the attention. All I wanted was to go back to work, to do my job, to save lives without the media circus following me everywhere. Dr. Cross stayed by my side through it all, and somewhere along the way, our relationship shifted from colleagues to something much deeper. He told me more about Claire, about the guilt he had carried for years, and how helping me had given him a sense of closure he never thought he'd find. 3 months later, I was back in the ER, my shoulder fully healed. When Jason came to visit me, he looked different, healthier, more at peace. He hugged me tightly and thanked me for giving him a second chance at life. And then he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000, the exact amount his father had tried to bribe me with. But this time, it wasn't a bribe. It was a scholarship fund Jason had set up in my name to help nursing students who couldn't afford their education. I couldn't stop the tears. This time, they were tears of joy. 6 months after the hostage situation, life had finally started to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The media frenzy had died down, and I was no longer stopped on the street by reporters asking for interviews or strangers wanting to shake my hand and call me a hero. I went back to working my regular shifts in the ER, treating patients, saving lives, and doing the job I loved without the weight of Richard Miller's vengeance hanging over my head. But some things had changed forever. I no longer walked through parking garages alone at night without looking over my shoulder. I no longer assumed that powerful people would face consequences for their actions without a fight, and I no longer took for granted the people who had stood by me when everything felt like it was falling apart. Dr. Adrian. Cross and I had become inseparable. What started as him protecting me from a dangerous man had evolved into something deeper, something neither of us had been looking for but both of us desperately needed. He told me once, late at night when we were curled up on his couch, that saving me had felt like a second chance, a way to make up for not being able to save Claire. I told him that he didn't need to make up for anything, that Claire's death wasn't his fault, and that he had already saved me in more ways than he realized. We moved in together a few months later, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had found a place where I truly belonged. Jason Miller had also become a fixture in my life, though in a much different way. After everything he had been through, he decided to pursue a career in law, determined to become the kind of prosecutor who held people like his father accountable. He kept in touch with me regularly, sending me updates on his studies, his progress, and his journey toward healing from the trauma his father had inflicted. The scholarship fund he had created in my name had already helped a dozen nursing students pay for their education, and every time I heard about another student who benefited from it, I felt a sense of pride and hope that maybe, just maybe, something good had come from all the darkness. Richard Miller's trial had been swift and brutal. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the list of charges seemed endless. Bribery, corruption, conspiracy, kidnapping, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice were just the beginning. Dozens of city officials, business partners, and associates were implicated in his schemes, and the fallout had sent shockwaves through the entire city. Richard's defense team tried every trick in the book, but in the end, the jury took less than 3 hours to find him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentence, Richard didn't flinch, didn't show any emotion. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, as if he had already accepted that his empire had crumbled and there was nothing left to fight for. Linda Miller had fared slightly better thanks to her cooperation with the prosecution. She received a reduced sentence of 5 years, most of which would be served under house arrest, but her reputation was destroyed beyond repair. The wealthy social circles she had once dominated wanted nothing to do with her, and the charities and organizations she had supported quietly removed her name from their donor lists. She sent me a letter once, about 4 months after the trial. It was short, formal, and carefully worded, probably written by her lawyer. She apologized for slapping me, for interfering with Jason's treatment, and for the pain her family had caused. She claimed she had been acting out of fear and desperation, that she had never meant for things to escalate the way they did. I read the letter once, then threw it in the trash. Some apologies come too late, and some damage can never be undone. Detective Marcus Hayes became a close friend as well. He stopped by the hospital every few weeks, sometimes to check on me, sometimes just to grab a coffee and talk. He told me that taking down Richard Miller had been one of the most satisfying cases of his career, not just because of the scope of the corruption they had uncovered, but because it had restored his faith that justice was still possible, even when the odds were stacked against you. He also admitted that he had been investigating Richard Miller for years, long before I had ever crossed paths with the Miller family, but he had never been able to gather enough evidence to make charges stick. My involvement, as terrifying and dangerous as it had been, had given him the opening he needed to finally bring Miller down. One evening, about 8 months after the hostage situation, I was finishing up a shift in the ER when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, still wary of unexpected calls after everything I had been through, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was young, nervous, and unfamiliar. "Is this Emma Reynolds?" the voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who is this?" There was a pause, and then the voice continued. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. You don't know me, but I wanted to call and thank you." "Thank me? For what?" The voice trembled slightly. My brother was one of the city officials who worked with Richard Miller. He took bribes, falsified documents, and helped Miller cover up his crimes for years. When everything came out during the trial, my brother was arrested too. He's in prison now, and our family, we've been destroyed by what he did. But the thing is, Nurse Reynolds, if you hadn't stood up to Richard Miller, if you hadn't fought back even when it put your life in danger, my brother would still be out there, still committing crimes, still destroying lives, and eventually it would have been even worse. So I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to do what no one else would do. I didn't know what to say. I had never thought about the ripple effects of what had happened, about the other lives that had been changed because I had refused to back down. "I'm sorry about your brother," I finally said. "I'm sorry your family is going through this." "Don't be," Sarah said quietly. "He made his choices, and because of you, he's finally facing the consequences. That's more than most people in his position ever have to deal with." She paused, then added, "I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It mattered to a lot of people." After we hung up, I stood there in the empty hallway staring down at my phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had never wanted to be a hero. I had never wanted any of this. All I had ever wanted was to do my job, to save lives, and to make a difference in the small corner of the world where I worked. But somehow, by simply refusing to be silenced, by standing up for what was right even when it was terrifying, I had sparked a chain of events that had changed countless lives. That night, when I got home, Dr. Cross was waiting for me with dinner and a bottle of wine. We sat on the balcony looking out over the city, and I told him about Sarah's call. He listened quietly, then took my hand and said, "You know, Emma, when I first met you, I thought you were just another nurse. Competent, hardworking, but nothing extraordinary." He smiled softly. "I was so wrong. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, and I'm so grateful that I got the chance to stand by your side through all of this." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. "You and Detective Hayes and Jason, you all risked so much to help me. We did it because it was the right thing to do," he said simply, "just like you did." A year after the trial, I was invited to speak at a nursing conference in Manhattan. The organizers wanted me to talk about my experience, about standing up to corruption and fighting for justice even when it seemed impossible. I was terrified at the idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and reliving the worst moments of my life, but Dr. Cross convinced me to do it. "You have a story that people need to hear," he said. "You have the power to inspire the next generation of nurses to be brave, to stand up for their patients, and to never back down in the face of intimidation." So I did it. I stood on that stage, my hands shaking, my voice trembling at first, and I told my story. I talked about the night Jason Miller's heart stopped, about the slap that echoed through the ER, about the threats and the bribes, and the moment I walked into Richard Miller's office, knowing I might not walk out alive. And I talked about the people who had stood by me, the ones who had risked everything to make sure justice was served. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, and I saw tears in the eyes of nurses who understood exactly what it felt like to be powerless, to be threatened, to be told that speaking up would cost them everything. After the speech, a young nurse approached me, her eyes wide with admiration. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be silent, that we can fight back." I smiled and took her hand. "You were never powerless," I said. "You just needed to see that someone else could do it first." As I left the conference that day, walking hand in hand with Dr. Cross through the streets of Manhattan, I realized that I had finally made peace with everything that had happened. Yes, I had been slapped. Yes, I had been threatened. Yes, I had been shot. But I had also survived. I had fought back, and I had won. Richard Miller was in prison, where he belonged. Linda Miller had lost everything she had spent her life building. And Jason Miller was free, finally able to live his life without the shadow of his father's cruelty hanging over him. Justice had been served, not because the system was perfect, but because people had refused to give up, had refused to let the powerful escape accountability, had refused to let fear silence them. And me? I went back to work. I kept saving lives. I kept fighting for my patients, because that's what nurses do. We show up, even when it's hard. We stand our ground, even when it's terrifying. And we never, ever back down. Because in the end, justice isn't just about the law. It's about people who are willing to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. And I will always be one of those people.